frankly, I'm never likely to forget the sight of that cold, greenish water creeping step by step up that stairway.
On April 15th, 1912, the most luxurious passenger liner on her maiden voyage from England to New York hit icebergs and sank to her fateful doom. Had the iceberg warnings that were radioed to the ship been reported to the captain, the tragedy may never have happened.
Had just 2 messages that had arrived in the radio room of the Titanic been transmitted to the bridge, the captain would surely have stopped the vessel and this disaster would not have occurred.
Instead, the ship hit an underwater iceberg spur, which caused a 300-foot gash along one side. 3 hours later, the Titanic went down. There weren't enough lifeboats to save everyone on board. 1,500 died in icy Atlantic water. The Titanic and her fate became legend. After over 8 decades, the tragedy of the Titanic has not dulled, nor has the public's grim fascination with this historical event. One by one, the dramatic stories reveal the tragedy that took place over 85 years ago. These startling stories help to create the dramatic images of the events that took place in April 1912. The Titanic.
Yet the tragedy that scarred and killed so many could have been avoided. No one knows exactly how many people died that night. Some say 1,503, others 1,522. Millionaires and their retinues, young men with their eyes set on opportunity, needy emigrants seeking a new world.
In 1907, J.B. Ismay, president of the White Star Lines, and Lord Peary, chairman of Harland and Wolff Shipbuilders, discussed their plan of construction for 3 ocean liners: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. The Titanic was to be used by the White Star Lines for voyages between Southampton, England, and New York, New York. The Titanic was to become the biggest ship of her day. The unique qualities of this vessel, which deemed her the unsinkable, were very likely the contributing factors which resulted in the death of more than 1,500 passengers on her maiden voyage on April 14, 1912. The ship was built at the Harland and Wolff Shipbuilding Yard in Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1912 at a cost of $7.5 million. She weighed 46,328 tons and measured 882 feet and 9 inches long and 92.5 feet in the beam. Each funnel was large enough to drive 2 trains through. There were 9 decks, and the ship was as high as an 11-story building. Her rudder weighed 20,250 pounds. The 3 anchors weighed a total of 31 tons. She had 3 props. There were 29 boilers, each one weighing nearly 100 tons. There were 4 elevators, 3 in first class and 1 in second. The Titanic was the first ocean liner to have a swimming pool and a gym. This incredible ship was constructed with a double hull and 16 so-called watertight compartments due to the fact that the bulkheads extended well above the waterline. The problem was that once one of these compartments was filled, the water would flow over the top to the next compartment. She was designed to stay afloat with any 2, possibly 3 compartments flooded, enabling her to withstand a collision at the joint of two compartments. It was thought that the Olympic-class ocean liners were unsinkable and themselves lifeboats. At the time, the British Board of Regulations required that any ship over 10,000 tons carry 16 lifeboats. The Titanic carried 20, 16 wooden, and 4 Engelhart collapsibles. Their capacity was 1,178 people. The theory of the day was that lifeboats were used to ferry passengers from the sinking ship to other ships that always were traveling in the heavily traveled shipping lanes. The Titanic had 28 staterooms and suites, with a first-class choice of decor. She featured Italian, Renaissance, Georgian, modern, and Old Dutch, Regency, Queen Anne, and Louis XIV, XV, and XVI for her first-class passengers. These first-class passengers mingled in the lounge on the promenade deck. The walls were similar to the ones at the Palace of Versailles near Paris. Situated next to this room was the Georgian reading and writing room for ladies, as well as the smoking room for men. There were 8,000 cigars loaded for the Titanic's maiden voyage. The first-class passengers could also take advantage of a gymnasium with rowing machines, a stationary bicycle, and an electric horse, a squash court, Turkish bath, 2 barber shops, an authentic Parisian cafe with French waiters and cooks, fabulous food and drinks. The cost for the journey was $4,350 for first class and $30 for third class. For the time, all the passengers had wonderful accommodations. Even the third-class cabins were more luxurious than other ships, although, due to the position of the third-class cabins, third-class passengers were trapped below deck during impending tragedy. The crew consisted of 860 men and women, of which 340 worked below decks in the engine department as engineers, boilermakers, greasemen, window cleaners, or linen keepers. Only a few dozen were actually engaged in the actual running of the ship directly, and of these, even fewer were officers. The captain, E.J. Smith, had a long and credible career with the White Star Line. Before this voyage, he had sailed over 2 million miles. This maiden passage of the Titanic was to be his final voyage before retirement. He was quoted as saying, "When anyone asks me how I can best describe my experience in nearly 40 years at sea, I merely say, uneventful. Of course, there have been winter gales and storms and fog and the like, but in all my experience, I have never been in any accident or any sort worth speaking about. I have seen but one vessel in distress in all my years at sea. I never saw a wreck and never have been wrecked, nor was I ever in any predicament that threatened to end in disaster of any sort." At 11:40 p.m., Sunday evening, with First Officer Murdoch in command, a lookout advised the bridge. Iceberg dead ahead. Even though Murdoch tried several maneuvers, the Titanic collided with an iceberg on the starboard side of the bow. Hull plates were buckled and pierced over a 300-foot-long area. A short time later, Captain Smith and the ship designer Thomas Andrews arrived on the bridge. Smith ordered the watertight doors closed and the warning bell rung. A few minutes later, damage reports started coming in. Disastrous news for Captain Smith. At least 5, possibly 6 of the watertight compartments were flooded. Mr. Andrews confirmed that the Titanic could not survive and would sink in a short time. Captain Smith sent out a radio distress signal. The lifeboats were uncovered, and the passengers and crew were told to report on deck. Most of the first-class passengers did not want to go out in the cold. The passengers, now realizing the seriousness of the situation, began to enter the lifeboats, women and children first. Many women opted to stay with their husbands, and men were not permitted to enter the lifeboats, even if there was room. Although each lifeboat had a capacity of 65, the first lifeboats were lowered, holding only 28. Several others left, only half full, possibly because the crew wasn't sure that the davits holding the lifeboats could hold a full load, even though they had been tested repeatedly. As the list or tilt of the ship grew steeper, the lifeboats began to leave more fully loaded. All of the lifeboats had been lowered by 2 a.m., 2 hours after the alarm was sounded. There have been speculations that the ship that was seen in the distance did not stop to help because it was illegally sailing in the area. Nothing could be proven against the captain of the Californian, thought to be the ship in question, although charges were eventually brought against him. No one knows what happened to Captain Smith. One story says that he swam to a lifeboat to give the people in it a baby that he found and then swam a little while before drowning. The Titanic situation was getting progressively worse as the bow sank lower and lower. The remaining 1,500 passengers must have begun to panic and realize that they were going to die. The power on the Titanic stayed on until the very last moment, due mainly to the bravery of the firemen and associated crew staying at their posts.
We rode out, I don't know how far it was, but it was beautiful, just a beautiful sight. It was, all the lights were on in the Titanic, and it was lifting just a little bit in the front, you know, going down. But it was a beautiful sight.
All the lights remained aglow, and reports suggest that drinks in the smoking lounge were free. The orchestra continued to play throughout the entire ordeal and perished along with everyone else. People in the lifeboats report hearing many songs, including Nearer My God to Thee.
When the water rushed into the boilers, there was a terrible explosion. And that's when I thought the boat broke in half. And that's when the people started jumping into the water and screaming. That's when they screamed. It was terrible. Screams of the women, you know, and all.
At 2:17 a.m., the stern rose high in the air. A thundering crash was heard as the ship broke into pieces. The lights flickered once, went out, came on again briefly, then went out for the very last time. The stern settled back and stood vertically on end, spun around 180 degrees, stayed there for a short time, then plunged from view. The time was 2:20 a.m., April 15th, 1912. The survivors reported horrible cries of 1,500 remaining in the frigid waters of the Atlantic Ocean. One by one, they succumbed to the cold and died. Not one lifeboat returned to help any of the victims. This was probably due to the fear that they would be capsized by panicky people trying to board. Of approximately 2,227 people on board, only about 705 survived. Just at the break of dawn, the Carpathia was spotted and was greeted by a small number of boats. All that remained of the 46,000-ton luxury liner Titanic.
After Titanic, never again were vessels permitted to travel across the Atlantic so far north when ice was breaking and drifting. After Titanic, regular lifeboat drills became compulsory. After Titanic, there was a place for everyone, passengers and crew, in the lifeboats. After Titanic, Bruce Ismay retired from the chairmanship of White Star and from public life.
The Titanic tragedy caused many new ship regulations to be enacted. All ships are now required to carry enough lifeboats for all passengers and crew. A universal distress call, SOS, was adopted instead of the several calls used at the time. SOS is easy to recognize and send out. All ships are now required to have a 24-hour radio watch. The Titanic wreckage was discovered in August 1985 by Robert Ballard with the help of sonar and a small submarine with lights and cameras. He explored the Titanic more closely with a robotic mini-sub and found that it contained many artifacts.
The man who found the Titanic says its discovery was the result of a lot of research and a lot of luck.
It was a fluke.
Dr. Robert Ballard and his colleagues had searched all of their most promising spots and found nothing. So they began sweeping the ocean floor with sophisticated sonar equipment.
We're scared to death of what we're coming into. We have absolutely no idea where the Titanic is right now, only that we're below the Titanic, and there's the big boiler coming in with its rivets, the 3 doors.
Ballard's crew had studied pictures of the boilers, so they knew immediately what they had. Then it was a race to take as many pictures as possible before bad weather forced them back to port. In the inky black depths of the ocean, the pictures they got are remarkable. Here, the robot camera passes over a deck crane. In this photo, you can see the door to the crew's quarters. This gaping hole is all that is left of smokestack number 1. Among the debris on the bottom, a serving platter. And most remarkable of all, to Ballard, wine bottles scattered across the ocean floor.
It was just the contrast of the gentleness of things in some places next to a twisted, massively destroyed bulkhead.
Ballard now says the ship California could have saved the 1,500 who drowned. That ship's skipper claimed he was too far away. But Ballard says his discovery puts the Titanic much closer to the California's reported position.
They should have responded, in my mind, gone over there and rescued those people.
How close were they?
In my mind, they were inside of 10 miles. Perhaps as close as 5 miles.
But Ballard won't be more precise. He doesn't want anyone else to know just where the Titanic is. He wants it left alone.
It belongs where it is, and it should remain where it is.
He may get his wish. A group of congressmen are trying to organize an international commission that would declare the Titanic a marine memorial, preserving her for all time in her final resting place 2.5 miles beneath the sea.
There has been much controversy about the recovery of these artifacts. Some wanted the grave site to be undisturbed, while others want history to be seen by all. The lifeboats, however, have never been found. Possibly, they were repainted and reused by other ships of the White Star Line.
RMS Titanic was in court to report on its salvage operations. Judge Calvert Clark required progress reports when he granted the company exclusive salvage rights. As he showed us some of the artifacts, company president George Tulloch was non-committal about Nauticus.
Because of the impact it would have on people here locally, I just prefer to say no comment, other than we have a high regard for them.
Among the more recent items recovered from the wreck are some crystal and a solid silver soup tureen, obviously damaged when the ship went down in April of 1912.
What happened that night in April? The voice that comes back from time is right there in that damage.
The salvage company has invested about $20 million so far, but has agreed not to sell any artifacts and not to violate the wreck, to keep it as a memorial to more than 1,000 lives lost with the Titanic.
These objects are for sharing. They have no value if they're here in a law firm or here in some private person's home. They have value when they're shared with everyone.
Well, it's been mixed, but we're very positive that we're doing the right thing here. RMS Titanic Inc. has gone to a lot of trouble to keep these artifacts together as a collection and preserve them so that in 200 years' time from now, these artifacts will be able to be seen by the general public.
So very happy to present this to you. Thank you very much.
After receiving a plaque from the Explorers Club, which will be left on the Titanic, expedition leader Bob Ballard explained the second visit to the broken giant will include a manned dive to the pitch-black ocean floor, 12,000 feet down.
We're not at all getting near any safety marks. We wouldn't, it's not something I want to do. And we've been diving in Alvin for 20 years, and it's a marvelous vehicle, and it's a very, very safe vehicle.
3 men will dive in Alvin, a 24-year veteran of 1,700 deep dives. From inside Alvin, they'll send out their own little satellite, the Jason Jr., an amazing robotic camera which should beam back incredibly clear color video of the Titanic. If all systems work, Jason will be set inside the Titanic, which has been an eerie grave since the morning of April 15th, 1912.
If and when you reach inside the Titanic, do you think your heart will be pounding? Or?
When we reach there, of course. I don't believe that there's really anything there, even though I developed the film last year, but as soon as it's outside the window, then I'm sure it'll strike me.
For some who joined in last September's stunning discovery of the legend on the bottom and who will stay behind this trip, mixed feelings.
I think the most exciting one was when we ran across the boiler. It was such a readily identifiable object that just nailed it for us, that it was the Titanic. And perhaps to the common observer it wasn't irrefutable evidence, but for us that was it, and that nailed it.
Very easily down into the grand staircase, and many different layers down. We saw at least 3 decks.
Bob Ballard, the man who found the Titanic, has now landed a 3-man submarine on top of the wreckage in pitch black, 2.5 miles down in the North Atlantic.
It's amazing. Just imagine going over the top of the Titanic with a giant helicopter and pouring out molasses that looks like blood, and have it just pour down and over the decks and down the side of the ship. It's amazing.
It's pretty early to tell, but from all the reports we've gotten from the ship, it appears that all the equipment is working very well, and he's come up with some spectacular video imagery.
When you heard him, did you get a little excited also, like everyone else?
Absolutely. I'm as fascinated with the Titanic as everybody else is in the country, I believe, and even the world.
The close-up pictures have been the work of Jason II, a Navy satellite robot which is the roving eye of the mission. We will see a still shiny brass ship's wheel, partially eaten away wooden decks, portholes, and we are told other detail in incredibly clear color. Bob Ballard's successes and a penchant for promoting them have provoked respect and jealousy in the scientific community. He is both good and lucky at what he does. The latest feat, landing on the hulk of the Titanic and photographing for history her broken remains.
I feel very confident that the Titanic will never be salvaged, never raised. The bow section is buried so deep into the mud, almost 50 feet into the bottom, that it would be impossible to pull it out of the bottom.
Also celebrating the man who first maneuvered the robot camera, Jason Jr., down the Titanic's spiral staircase.
Actually, I was concerned about doing as little damage to the vehicle as possible because we wanted to use it, and trying not to disturb the, well, we coined them as rusticles. It was fair to say that it was a unique feeling to at the end of the dive, to sit back and pretty much close your eyes and think about it.
I have no desire to go back to the Titanic. I hope that through the efforts that we've accomplished in the last few weeks, that it will satisfy the curiosity of everyone as to what its situation is, and that there will be no real reason or need to go back, and that the Titanic will finally rest in peace.
initial dives concentrated on the bow section, where Jason Jr. could maneuver free of obstacles, while Alvin sat safely on Titanic's expansive forecastle deck. Using its 4 small thruster motors, JJ can spin on a dime, hovering above Alvin and guided from within. Here it approaches Titanic's chief officer's cabin. Later, JJ peers into the promenade windows. What was once where the wealthy walk is now a home for a rat-tailed fish. Its short trip finished, JJ spins and returns to Alvin. Our attention is now focused on the debris field, 600 meters south of the bow section. Here, countless artifacts, like this electric space heater, litter the floor. But our ultimate objective has been the stern section of the ship, which eluded us last year and was finally found late during this trip by Angus. It was on this deck that most of those who lost their life sought final shelter, the last portion of the ship to yield to the sea. It was here that many people jumped to their death, hoping against all hope they could survive in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. The end to this nightmare was the beginning of a dream for us. JJ did all we asked it to do and more. A lot of people, there's a lot of theories about the sinking of the Titanic, a lot of discussions, and I think that certain observations can rule certain things out, but they can't rule everything in. And I think that what we can safely say is that the Titanic did not arrive on the bottom intact and broke up on impact, and the stern was here and the bow was here. The distance of 600 meters negates that possibility, and the lack of hardly any debris in between the two. What it appears is that the ship broke up very early.
The recovery of the artifacts from the Titanic continued to reveal the opulence of this luxurious cruise liner. The rescued artifacts will be on display in museums around the world for everyone to experience. Finally, was the fact that the Titanic was deemed unsinkable a cause for overconfidence? Was the importance of being the fastest ship to cross the Atlantic a contributing factor? Or was the tragedy of the maiden voyage a horrible accident? Whatever the answer, the story of the Titanic will continue to fascinate forever.